Hi, I'm Gini Larsen. I'm your Women's Director here at ROCKPOINT. And today I want to take a look at one of my favorite stories from the New Testament. It's from the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 9. Here's what it says. There was a believer in Joppa named Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was always doing kind things for others and helping the poor. About this time she became ill and died. Her body was washed for burial and laid in an upstairs room. But believers had heard that Peter was in nearby Lydda, and so they sent 2 men to beg him, "Please come as quickly as possible." So Peter returned with them, and as soon as he arrived, they took him to the upstairs room. The room was filled with widows who were weeping and showing him the coats and other clothes that Dorcas had made for them. But Peter asked them all to leave the room, and then he knelt and prayed. Turning to the body, he said, "Get up, Tabitha, arise." And she opened her eyes. When she saw Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and he helped her up, and then he called in all the widows and the believers and presented her to them alive. News spread throughout the whole town, and many believed in the Lord. Acts 9, verses 36 to 42. In spite of her unusual name, Dorcas, I don't know too many women named Dorcas nowadays. This story is so encouraging to me. I love the fact that God uses this woman to make such an impact in her community. Dorcas was one who ministered to widows in the seacoast town of Joppa. Joppa is a harbor town, and many of these women that she ministered to were widows and orphans of seamen and sailors who had been out to sea and had drowned or had an accident of some kind and were left there in poverty. And so Dorcas had mercy on them, and she began sewing and making clothing for them. This was probably the first social worker in the Bible. So if you're a social worker, good job. Here she is, your first social worker. She had the gift of mercy and service. And I love the fact that God used her friends to go find Peter and bring him from another town where he was very busy doing ministry to bring her back to life. Peter arrives on the scene after 3 days, and we know that 3 days is a very important number in the New Testament. And in this case, it was evidence that she truly was dead, and that when he arrived there, several days had passed, and then when he kneels and prays next to her and calls her by name, and she sits up, we know that this has been a miraculous raising from the dead. And all of her friends were there weeping and crying. They loved her so much. And I think the part that always gets me about this is that we see so many stories in the New Testament about amazing teachers, amazing prophets, people with incredible giftedness to build the early church. And yet here's the story of a woman who had a gift of mercy and a gift of service. You know, in the Bible, when God puts something in your hand, he wants you to use it to build his kingdom. Like Moses, he put a staff in Moses' hand, and Moses used that staff to lead the people all the way to the edge of the promised land. And in this story, God puts a needle and a thread in Dorcas's hand, and she used that needle and thread to sew all of those garments for widows and orphans to the glory of God. At the very end of this passage, the last line, verse 42 reads, "And the news spread throughout the whole town, and many believed in the Lord." Because of the miraculous healing and who she was in life, many people came to know Christ from the story. And I think that's so encouraging. Whatever you do, whatever that is, maybe you do accounting, maybe you teach, maybe you're a police officer or a first responder. Whatever you do, the gifts that God has given you, do those to the glory of God. And many will look at your life, and it's a promise to us that they can come to have faith that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, based on your living testimony and the work that God's doing in your life. So I love the story of Dorcas from Acts chapter 9. I hope you all will take a few minutes to go back and take a look at it today. Thank you so much, and have a great week.